you're at the back of the room, I will encourage you to come forward and sit close to the stage, so it's a bit more intimate. So we're going to make a start. So thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here for this amazing show called The Post-Gender Bubble. If you never met me, my name is Olivier Kotsaftis, and together with Sarah MacArthur, which is here in the room, we are Melbourne Speculative Futures. Melbourne Speculative Futures is an international network for those interested in speculative design, critical design, and design fiction. Before we start this event, I would like to acknowledge the fact that the land we are meeting upon today is traditionally owned by the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This land was never ceded, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. The topic of Aboriginal futures is something which is really dear to us at Melbourne Speculative Futures, and I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to organize an event on the topic. But today's a bit different. Today we are basically thinking through our collective journey towards the future of our city of Melbourne. So this morning we saw some amazing creative writing pieces with our partner RMIT Nonfiction Lab, and then deep dive into the human experience of living in Melbourne in 2050, thanks to a workshop with a futurist named Bridget Angela, who's also like a Swinburne University academic. And this event you're about to notice is asking the question, what if Melbourne was a genuine non-binary city? So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a bit of a statement to introduce our host today. And here we go. So for those who don't know Simona, but I doubt that, let me introduce her for you. So Simona Castricum is a musician, a designer, an architecture academic from Melbourne. As an educator and a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne, her work explores gender non-conforming and queer intersections in architecture. Simona is one of Melbourne's unique underground live music performers and DJs, and also a community radio broadcaster on PBS FM. In a moment, I'll leave the stage to Simona for a live talk show about future queer cities. A non-binary influencer, Nayuka Gorrie, Bobuq, and Brooke powers, she will explore how resistance, indulgence, risk, pleasure, and escape make for a safer, more inclusive city. With this delightful guide, let's dismantle our gender binary constructs and discover together the beauty, truth, and delight of a queer city. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, my name is Simona Castricum. Before we get started, I would like to pay respects to the Wurundjeri and Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation who are on today. I recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded, and shout out to First Nations people in the room today. Post-gender bubble is the conversation that we're going to have today in the CAF. So, apparently I'm told the chairs are very comfortable, but they're wonderful. I've got millennial pink and sky blue, so we're definitely on the Pantone colours this year. It's great. I'd like to introduce a really amazing group of people, group of thinkers, and mates of mine too. Bobuq on my left here, Nayuka Gorrie, and Brooke Powers. Would you all make them feel welcome? So the format of today, and we'll take some questions towards the end, but we're sort of going to just go through some, I guess, scenarios, some questions, pose some, some scenarios of what we kind of think the post-gender bubble is at the moment, or what it looks like. What do we need to sort of do to kind of get there? And yeah, so I guess we were talking about when we were sitting down trying to work out, I guess, some of the things that we wanted to talk about, and I guess I kind of placed this conversation in, yeah, we're in 2019, and the nines of decades are kind of interesting in, yeah, if I got 69, which is like not only a really bad Bryan Adams song, but also like it's like the sort of human rights and civil rights movement was kind of really kicked off in 69. Then 79 was like the explosion of punk. 89 was like the explosion of acid house and rave culture. We're not quite sure what happened in 99, apart from the millennium. Yeah. But I kind of got the feeling that in 09 there was like, yeah, a really big, I guess, a time came, I guess, for gender non-conforming people to move in, I guess, to a new place of visibility and a new place of consciousness. So here we are in 2019, and we just kind of want to have a chat about how we might get to 2050, considering there's a hell of a lot of years between them, but I think it pretty much just sort of starts with right now. But just some background, some stats, because I do a PhD, everyone wants stats, but you know, I don't really know how far they get or where they find these kind of stats. But this was a survey by Telethon Kids called Trans Pathways. And it was a survey of people between 14 to 25. And what it found was that you have 48.6% of people that identified as non-binary, with 39.7 as trans male and 15 as trans female. And I think what that really revealed was that there is this emerging critical mass, not only of trans people, but of non-binary people as well. And people that, I guess, really are looking to break down the binaries that we're constantly kind of pushed into from birth. And the Australian census, as cooked as a way it was trying to find, I guess, you know, like a demographic of trans and non-binary and intersex, gender non-conforming people. So it revealed that 34% of people who live in Victoria who identify as trans or gender diverse. So with that, how Melbourne is placed in this conversation is somewhat interesting. Nayuka, I'd like to start with you and ask, what if queers reclaim subversion?
That's a great question. Yeah, so we had a yarn over coffee maybe a month or so, maybe two, I don't know, time. And yeah, we're kind of thinking about, so marriage equality, I suppose, happened a while ago now, and thinking about the place that queers occupy. Well, I often think about the place queers occupy in the Australian imaginary. I think, so we were talking about cops, which will come up later on. But I think it'd be really, sorry, I'm really spacey at the moment. I've started taking medication, it's doing my head in, but it would apparently be good for me. So sorry, I guess maybe my medication is making me less aversive. I think with sometimes when we talk about visibility, we kind of say, I think people can take it for granted that it's just this good thing, and that queer visibility or trans visibility or whatever it's been has been just inherently good. But I think visibility can be kind of, I don't know, I suppose dangerous, or can put a target on your back. So I think, I don't know, when I think of subversion, I think, well, the opposite of subversion is when something is normalised or made mainstream, and I think the danger of being in the mainstream is that all of your like jagged edges or whatever they might be kind of get smoothed out and you're made palatable. So I think for queers to be subversive would be quite, I think, exciting, or I don't know, I'm rambling. Can someone please help me answer the
It makes sense.
Simona.
No, and I guess that kind of question came from, there was this interview that I was reading with John Waters, and like, you know, everyone's kind of like, well, John Waters is like, you know, sort of like a queer sort of genius in that sense of subversion. And John Waters was sort of lamenting that queers had kind of lost that, I guess, framework or position of subversion, and it was even being sort of co-opted by perhaps, like, it was like the Trump election campaign, or right-wingers are like way more subversive than queers, and like call-out culture has made subversion for queers almost impossible.
Yeah, I think definitely, it's not so much with queers, but probably the left in general, I think really tries to be its best self, and sometimes that means like calling everyone out, and I've probably been guilty of that, whatever, we all have. Calling people out, but also like this need to be really politically correct in a way that can be really stifling or not let people make mistakes. And I think I think sometimes it's a bad thing for art, or it's a bad thing, I don't know. I don't think we should be out here being cunts to each other, but I think, I think, like, you know, if you want to piss somewhere, then go piss somewhere else. I don't know. You know, like, I think if we're made palatable and mainstream and shiny and acceptable, we lose, like, the thrust and the thing that propels us forward or something. I don't know, Bobuq, Brooke.
I guess the thing for me that is historically most subversive about queerness is its specific relationship to borders and dismantling them, and like trying to identify through queer practices of sex and family and community an alternative to borders that isn't rigid or state defined or binary. And I think this idea that like you can queer something by making it, wear one dangly earring on its right ear, or by like putting to Mr. Ratburn from Arthur having a gay relationship, getting married on the PBS show. I think it's actually it's really destructive to the subversiveness of queerness, because it attributes and simplifies queering to something like to a homonormative pairing or relationship dynamic. Whereas I think the history of queerness, the history of kind of anti-fascist movements of which queerness has been one historically, is actually something more militant and should remain something more militant, especially in how we conceive of the city and aim to avoid the sanitizing of urban design, families, communities, bodies, etc.
Yeah, just coming off that point you made about making queerness shiny and palatable, marketable, or like a category that can be held. And I want to bring that into the idea of being non-binary. And being a non-binary person, what does it mean, non-binary, not taking part in the binary? And what is the binary? It's a colonial construct, it's a capitalist patriarchal construct. So by its very definition, non-binary identity sits outside of something that can be categorized in a mainstream kind of way. Yet we are seeing that happen because it's part of the fight for visibility, it's part of the movement for access, for gender-neutral bathrooms. We need to be able to define this thing that is almost indefinable. And that's, thinking about 2009, and here we are at 2019. And the last 10 years I came out of the closet 7 years ago, and being trans 7 years ago looked extremely, extremely different in Melbourne to how it looks now. Even just 3 or 4 years ago, it looked extremely different. There was a point, was it 2015, 2016? scene. Whenever Laverne Cox was at the cover of
the
Time
trans
magazine,
tipping point.
but it was literally a absolute difference in culture and in like, you know, being a part of the music scene and art scenes and clubbing scenes in Melbourne. Like it was an absolute tipping point in the culture. And Melbourne is significant in Australia, and that's an additional stat that 1/3 of all gender non-conforming people live in Melbourne. I mean, in Victoria is really interesting. We have a really political scene here, and we have access for non-binary people in terms of the way the culture respects pronouns and identity in ways that are almost unmatched in almost most cities around the world. I won't say all, there are other places, but it's a really like great place to be non-binary, but we've still got a long way to go. And it's really interesting to reflect on 10 years of the movement, and here we are now, privileged to be in Melbourne, to be able to be non-binary and be watched by all these people at a panel and, you know, and Melbourne Knowledge Week and mainstream, whatever you want to call it.
Festival of thinking.
Festival of thought, yeah. That's great. Where how many other places that happen, who knows? But I think, like, at the same time, we need to look at this movement is not so much. It's so hard. I feel like with everything that's going on politically and everything that we have to deal with, you know, continuing to fight for our rights in the same way that we've been doing it for the past century is not what's going to be the future. So we actually need to like shift how human beings relate to one another, how like our actual consciousness in terms of like we are just in this process of reenacting trauma, reenacting abuse and guilt and all these cycles on each other over and over again, like, collectively. And I think being non-binary, being that it sits outside of like this paradigm of colonialism in some way, is a huge part of that movement.
Yeah, I feel like the trans tipping point was like a moment for cis people to recognise like a critical mass. But it's actually that critical mass of gender non-conforming people that gives me hope. So, yeah. Bobuq, next question for you. What if trans visibility was getting better for everybody?
I just want to add one last thing to the last point. Because I think in the arrangement of queerness, especially in cities, but also just geographically, I think sometimes there's this idea that it either falls in a separatist politics, or it falls in one of inclusivity and looking at trying to like upskill and mobilize large communities across identities. And I think, you know, if you look at the idea of separatism as radical, that was one that was touted by TERFs, or trans-exclusionary radical feminists, like lesbians in the 80s and in Australia. You know, there's a large history of this country, like the queer movement of this country is like radical separatist lesbians who were trans-exclusionary, who hated men, you know, and this like this kill all men movement, which thankfully we've moved past in understanding that it is racist in ways it's already racialized. But yeah, so I think it's important to just identify the history of so-called subversive queerness as well, and the reasons why we've moved on, not as a natural progression of history, but as a kind of sharpening of our kind of political practice. And then in response to this question, well, yeah, I mean, it's like, of course it's not equal, like nothing's equal. Any foolish understanding of equality as a lived material reality of people like us is always already just fraught. So I think that the reality of being someone who is racialized, is brown, is Muslim, and especially in today's day and age, of proximity to Islam and affiliation with Islam being something that is endangerment and is an active like security threat to be inhabiting a body that is gender non-conforming and a night dweller, as we all, you know, as many of us who club and partake in like nighttime activities are, is just like multiple compounding levels of endangerment, and not to misattribute that endangerment to any like intrinsic internal quality, but to be attributing that to the like patriarchal, heteronormative, cisnormative, white supremacist fuckery that we involuntarily have to participate in.
add to that?
Well, yeah, I guess going on from my last point, like visibility in what context? Visibility in terms of non-binary being something palatable.
Yeah, I feel like the pressure of visibility is like people expect it. Like,
because I feel like my gender has to relate to cis sensitivities in a lot of ways, like the way I have to outwardly project my identity and my expression, how I need to define that online as someone who is in the public eye, needs to relate to like the cis, what do we call it? The cis heteropatriarchy, is that the word? Cis normativity in some way. It needs to relate to what we've all been brought up with. But I feel that the actual visibility that needs to happen is taking on a practice of non-binary in your life. Like, and that doesn't mean that you are non-binary. It's about how you encounter other human beings. It's how you look at and treat other people regardless of their presentation or what you might assume their gender might be. Like, it's breaking down these assumptions and breaking down that we have assumptions, because often we're all brought up to just know that a man is a man, a woman is a woman. So it's like, it's actually a practice that needs to be taken on. And, I did a panel at BCA last week talking about transphobia as an alumni of BCA. And it's, it's not just being able to use gender-neutral pronouns. It's actually how do you orient your sexuality, knowing that, actively breaking down gender roles in your life, like actively breaking down how do you, what do you get out of your gender roles? What safety can you get out of your gender roles? Like actually, doing that work, because we're here having to do the work because it's at the core of who we are. But in order for actual space to happen, and it's such. It'll give you so much to do it, to actually put in that work.
But also in the context of BCA and anything too, is I guess as a practicing artist or as a worker or as a professional, but there are these kind of forced into these sort of very cis-normative frameworks. And if we want to kind of articulate anything about being non-binary or gender non-conformity, it's so often really difficult to have that conversation with a boss or with a lecturer or with an assessor or something like that, and they'll just be like, "Well, I don't understand what you're talking about. You failed." And that's the problem with the institution. I find is that there's just not that readability.
Absolutely, and I feel like having identified as a trans woman for so many years now, that has been an identity for me that's kept me really safe. In terms of it's completely understandable inside of cis-normative frameworks. So to my family, to any institution that I have to go into, to my yoga studio, to the restaurant where I need to use the toilet, it's like, well, I'm a woman, so I can use this toilet. Well, I'm a woman, so I use she, her, blah, blah, blah. But it's like when you bring in the non-binary conversation, which I need to start doing now, I'm at a loss to I haven't had experience in this, so it's like, oh God, how do I get the people to understand who I am? How do I navigate myself in this world? How do I navigate how do I navigate my right to use which bathroom in which space?
Yeah, even I was doing an ethics approval process for Melbourne University, and one of the comments I got back was, define cisgender. And it was just kind of and for everyone out there who's not quite sure what cisgender is, Google it. And I think that's maybe what I want to send back to the institution, is Google it. I haven't finished the ethics approval.
And I think that in that conversation around visibility and transvisibility, it's also important to acknowledge that the degree of misogyny at play, which appears in there always being an identified role for butch or masculine iterations of women, and there being a really long history of that. on the contrary, the experience of being trans feminine, or in some way like compromising the privileges or the apex of privilege in order to be trans or non-binary or trans feminine, whatever, has a specific valence of misogyny at play, and that is punished accordingly. You know, a butch woman might be desexualized, and that's a form of violence. But if you compare that to the death rates and the slaughtering of trans women, especially trans women of color, all across the world, it's actually incomparable, and you can't hold them in the same conversation, really. And it's important to acknowledge that that's just misogyny as well.
Oh, microphone. I'm working on my microphone technique at the moment. What if the city was not just a place for protest, but for queers to work, live, or party? What if? Well, it's like, you know, we'll go to the city to protest, and the city's obviously like a really important place in which to do that. But, you know, 20 years ago, like you could rent a studio, you could club all night on the weekend, and you could probably live in the city. But now it's just been gentrified so significantly that it's like the only thing that we can do now left is to protest in the street. How do we get these spaces back?
I live in the city.
Are you where?
I live in East Melbourne.
Not East Melbourne. No, but I mean like the CBD. It's like, you know, we're sort of kicked out into the fringe, and like the CBD is a really important part of like queer Melbourne history.
Do you guys have it?
I think, like, I'm a bit cautious of white people saying they're going to reclaim anything. I don't. It's like, what iteration of history are you taking back? I think first, like, it's Aboriginal land first, so I'm more interested, I think, in Aboriginal people being able to take it back. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I still think. Then also, and what does it mean for queers to work with black fellas in, like, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of cities, like, black people are pushed, like, with blacks and queers have probably always lived together because they've been kind of cast away or whatever, but sort of black people, you know, Fitzroy North, and just kind of getting pushed further and further out. So I think my heart, of all the people to be gentrified, I think my heart is mostly with black fellas first. That's kind of where my mind goes. In saying that though, like, you can't look at our nightlife now and see clubs closing down and like, not be a bit worried about the state of things a bit. Anyway, Brooke.
Well, to contextualise that last statement, we've had, 4 really key, I'm going to call them community spaces, only because they're clubs, but they're legendary clubs where people have come to discover themselves, discover their communities, discover, danger, and together, and to go through and to purge, and to take drugs and to dance and to push their art form. Like, we've had, Liberty Social, Mercat, Hugs and Kisses, and now Lounge Bar that's been in the last 3 years. And we're having a transitional period. I'm going to call it. I'm a DJ, by the way, so like, my point of view of what we're going through now is that we're going through a weird transitional period in terms of, like, the Melbourne clubbing scene. And this has been brought up in this panel because there is an importance in radical spaces to dance for queer people. So we're at, like, a bit of a crossroads, and it's, significant of a 9-year. I mean, that's bringing it back to that. What comes out of the next decade? It's really hard to know.
I think we were just talking about this before, and like how there's this misunderstanding around what intellectuals should be doing with their free time, and what public figures and what people who are like at the forefront of activism and agitation. And it's like, you know, this idea that you're just reading books or attending kind of like seminars or existing in these like ivory towers. Come in a knowledge week, right? But I really feel like it's a dangerous mistake, and it's so inaccurate, because it's like the reality is that the history of like political dissidents have always been like on dance floors, in addition to on the streets, in addition to, you know, storming Parliament House. And it's like to have any kind of reductionist, static viewpoint on like what protest looks like is always going to lead you astray. You know, and I know, like with each one of the three people I'm here with today, like we've all had transformative conversations in the smokers' room in some fucking nightclub at 3 a.m. And I think that's so important. And it's not a coincidence that we're also agitators and that we're also doing like really important things. It's not a coincidence. It's like, it's essential, it's inherent to community building, and it's inherent to the kind of, to the sustainability of us being able to do this, is going out there and having that release and connecting with people, often drug-induced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if I'm really honest, like there are some weeks where I just probably wouldn't have been able to make it if I didn't know I had somewhere to be on. Like somewhere to go on a Friday or Saturday night. I think like the world can be really, you know, and we've just come on this side of an election. I think we need places to, like, even just to feel slightly like euphoric and like there's some kind of dance utopia. I think they're necessary for our survival. Even if the rest of the world feels like shit, we know. Like, I took my mum to the fag a couple of months ago. She had the best time. Yeah, it's really important to have those spaces. I think we need places to be able to hold each other, even if we are high when we're doing it.
But look, what if queer and trans people weren't a threat to the state?
I mean, I like this question. I was just talking about this earlier today, in the way that we are, you know, like politically neutered by the state, in desexualizing us, rendering us inaccessible in our gender non-conformity. And this is an experience that more applicable to AMAP people for whom, like, you know, trans femininity or a voluntary dressing of femininity and items attributed to femininity is correspondent to your desexualizing, especially by gay men, for instance. And so there's a sense, right, that then we undermine the nuclear family model by which the state sustains itself, right? And that's everywhere from like capitalism to Marxism. All of these political frameworks are built upon the nuclear family, mom, dad, and the kids. And they go to the work and they raise their kids so the kids can become parents and continue the work of the state and continue the work of nation building and border reinforcement. And so as soon as you add a neutered or involuntarily neutered gender non-conforming subject whose conception of family is a housemate or a best friend or other trans and non-binary people, like that's radically detrimental to the state upholding its nation building project. And so I think it's beautiful that we do that, and I think it's a solution to overpopulation. And overpopulation is the primary driver, and the Anthropocene is the primary driver of like the world's fuckery, you know? So much of the shit that's going on right now can be attributed to like the Industrial Revolution, colonization, and human beings, especially white people.
I think if queer and trans people weren't a threat to the state, I'd be like, well, our demands aren't high enough, or like, what are we doing wrong? Like, we should, yeah, I think if we aren't, that means we've like conformed and boring and just a part of the machine. I think, yeah, we should be threatening.
I think that might be next. You sort of had some clairvoyancy happening this week with the election anyway, so you're still bringing it through. Nayuka, what if queers stop partying in police uniforms and old prisons?
So it seems fitting that this question is here, particularly after what happened a few weeks ago at Hares and Hyenas. I'm really interested in the way that penal culture is like a part of Australian society. I think Australia is a penal colony, so it makes sense that it's everywhere in our culture. It's kind of like asking people or asking the fish to notice water. It can feel like, and I think, yeah, Simona and I have talked about it. It's helped me kind of shape my understanding in terms of, so historically, queers used to like do that sort of thing because it was that subversive. It had like subversive potential. You know, if cops are bashing you and then you go and wear a cop uniform and like have sex and it'll piss on or whatever, that's quite a subversive thing to do. But it's shifted, I think, in the particularly in the gay community, where it's become a part of that kind of homo nationalism, and it's actually just about, yeah, wanting to be part of the machine. I just, as someone who has had family be killed by police officers, it doesn't make sense to me why anyone would want to party in a cell. Like, I had an uncle who died in a police cell. I don't know why you'd want to. I can understand, I can understand the power and the lure of parties and wanting to just fuck it up and whatever, but knowing that there's like black ghosts in these places, it makes little sense to me. I think if queers stopped, I think if we take that like wanting to be, if it is the subversion that we're interested in, there are ways to do that and still target the police in other ways that don't mean disrespecting black people. And also, yeah, like how much is subversion and how much is emulating, like, you know, masculine, white masculine stuff that comes with the police. Yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on it. But Brooke?
Sure, well, I have two points I really wanted to delve into, or two examples I wanted to delve into in terms of why we say the phrase, cops don't make us safe. So the first one was DJing at Secret Garden Festival in New South Wales earlier this year. For those that don't know, the police have been on a huge crackdown on festivals and parties and venues in New South Wales and Sydney for the last couple of years. What you have to go through to actually get into the festival, and this is through the artist's entrance, so this isn't even through the main entrance, was about 30 or so cops, sniffer dogs, strip search tents, and the like. Now, that in itself is someone's misguided attempt at safety, so let's just say that. But then you have police that are emotionally charged, and they are out for revenge, and they're out to take vengeance on people who they don't deem as worthy of being treated as humanely. So you hear stories of unlawful strip searches, people being asked to squat and cough, to squat over mirrors, strip search in full view of other people. You get people racially profiled for these strip searches. There was a festival in New South Wales where over 100 people with absolutely no drugs on them found at all were all strip searched, and none of them were let into the festival afterwards, after they were found to be completely free of drugs. I was stopped just short of being strip searched in this instance, and it was a completely traumatizing way to enter into a festival. And then in the festival, and there are groups of police walking around with sniffer dogs. You hear stories of them holding girls up against a wall, shining their flashlights in their face, interrogating her. You know, you hear all this stuff. You have free legal services next to the food stands at these festivals. Like, the point I want to make is that they're not, like, there's these laws, right, that are meant to, you know, let's just say it's meant to be for safety. It doesn't make us safe at all to have draconian laws over drug use. And that's another conversation, but let's just say that's what it is. To act that out lawfully is to be, you know, come from a place of doing I can't think of the right word, but just doing your work. They're coming from an extremely emotionally charged space that is very loaded with judgment and out to get and punish people. Then we go to what just happened at Hares and Hyenas, where a friend of mine actually who lives in Hares and Hyenas, which is the queer bookstore and cafe, recently, you probably all heard about this, recently raided by the police in a case of mistaken identity. At no point did a group of police with rifles in the middle of the night identify themselves as police. They broke this man's arm in several places. The surgeon said it was a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10 for pain. Minimum 10 hours surgery, could lose the use of his arm. This person who was innocent gets to go to hospital. And what the media is, most of the media is missing in the way they address this is that, sure, an innocent person shouldn't be treated like this. No human should be treated like that. There is no reason for that much force. So why are the police coming from this place of revenge, of vengeance, of trying to punish people instead of just enacting the law? So there's a problem in the police. There's a cultural problem that we need to address here, because culturally the police see themselves as holier than thou. Like they are...
I always look at the logo, uphold the right, and I'm like, for who?
Exactly for who? And it's like, so we need to address like the emotionality of the police, because if that's, you know, okay, so there might be good cops, there might be cops that don't want to come from this place, the cops that genuinely want to do good in their lives, and that's the way they think is a good way to be. But do they know cops that come from this place? Are they under a boss who turns a blind eye, you know, like...
I think I can jump in. My mum used to be a police officer. I think what we need to... A few things. So just last week a report came out about, police had a really bad queer week. A report came out about, on Ida Hobbit, about their internal culture. And surprise, surprise, it turns out the police are really homophobic and transphobic. Who would have thought? And they find that it's a culture of like that kind of white hyper masculinity and heteronormativity. What I find interesting is that there are people who enter the police force expecting anything different. If that is how people are treating each other on the inside, kind of have like very first-hand knowledge of the way that police treat black people. But this is how they're treating people, their own people. So we can only imagine sort of how people get treated, civilians get treated. And I think back to what Brooke was saying about the good cop, I think personally I'm not interested to know if there are any good cops, because good cops are required to do very bad work, very traumatic work. Their job is like necessarily a bad job. They regularly traumatise people, they regularly hyper-incarcerate black and brown people. So whether or not we do know that police have higher rates of domestic violence, they're more likely to be violent at home than the rest of the population. And good cops know about it and don't do anything. So it is a structural, it is a cultural issue. And I don't think we have a chance of like making the police good. I think they need to not exist, and as communities we need our own way of dealing with things, which, you know, a lot of us do anyway. So obviously ACAB. Yeah, but should we be partying in their stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, obviously not. It's like, one thing that I think is important to add with the topic around Hares and Hyenas is like, that it was racialized, that the target was Lebanese, and Greek man's like proximity in appearance to Islam and the Middle East was the reason why he was so violently attacked and continue to be beat to that severity. And then the other thing that comes to mind in this conversation from the talk from the What If Prisons Didn't Exist the other day, that Marie and Rosalind and Deb were all on together, was this idea of like the carceral logic being not necessarily always something visual and visually signifying. You know, like cop uniform and prison bars on your windows are like really obvious, obviously recall the carceral logic and the police state, but that there are really invisible and micro ways that we, and queers as well, kind of perpetuate the carceral logic and the police state. From locking your doors at night to disposability culture and cancel culture, you know, like these are ways, really, really specific material ways that we actually uphold this like nation building carceral logic, and that we buy into the idea of a stranger's criminality or immorality, inherent badness. And so, yeah, I think about even the way, the alternatives that they mentioned in the panel, like being community, and we talk about community as an alternative to the police state and just the state in general. But then how many of us are actually willing to go above and beyond to engage with community, to engage with strangers that we have nothing to gain from, and what it means to be visibly gender non-conforming and queer, and to go out of your way and potentially put yourself into danger in order to engage with strangers or your neighbours or people who could and actively do often cause harm.
I'm just going to get around the boobs bit. Oh, that's all right. Fantastic. For Brooke, what if the relationship between risk and safety for queer and trans people was valued?
I think risk is a huge part of our culture and is a huge part of our lineage, for sure, if we look back and pay respects to queers that have come before us. And you know, the resulting scenes or parts of our culture that come out of it is based off this dance around risk, you know, and how, you know, it's this balance too, and I think this is across the board in the queer journey, and like just the journey to be ourselves is like this balance of being authentic to who you are and how much you have to go through just to be able to do that. You know, and it's not just coming out, it's ongoing, and it's a constant reevaluation of your identity and how that fits into social space, and then how you navigate your own safety, whether that's in your family, whether that's just walking down the street as a visibly queer or trans person, whether that's trying to be an artist in the world and be well known and successful. Going back to talking about clubbing, you know, I'm talking about all these spaces closing down. These are all these dark, dingy spaces with, you know, no rules almost, like lots of risky behaviour in terms of drug taking, as well as just like not being the most safe space, you know, and also the nightlife. Like I've been, like, okay, before people knew what trans was, like before this trans tipping point we talked about, like I would go out clubbing and it would be me and like Simona and like maybe like 4 other trans queer people, and we'd just like form a circle on the dance floor at Boney and no one could penetrate it, and it was like we couldn't talk to anyone else in the whole room for the whole night. We would just be on and it would just be us, but we would have to be so fucking fierce just to be there, just to take that space. Like we had to fight, and it was like the best nights of our lives. So it's a complicated issue in terms of, you know, we go to safety and for architecturally, and you, Simona, you brought this into my awareness. Architecturally, it's like, does that mean more lights at night? Does that mean more police officers? Does that mean more PSOs? Like all these things where it doesn't actually give us a space to navigate our own relationship to risk, or our own what needs to be kept hidden. and what needs to be like in like, you know, when I used to dress like miniskirts, high femme, like heaps of makeup, you know, it was like walking to the club was so intense. But then when I was at the club, it was like that was my space. You know, that was mine, and if someone fucked with me there, it was like, you don't have a right. Like, you know.
I was just going to say, I think this topic around risk and space is interesting because I think it makes me think of like, you know, the backlash around Eurydice Dixon being murdered and raped in Royal Park. And that really led to a lot of conversations around like, why weren't there floodlights in Royal Park? Why aren't there policemen at like at every like, you know, potentially dangerous public space to prevent something like that? I mean, I think we've like debunked that in its own, but I think what I want to get at is that like, you know, 80% or something of rapes and sexual assaults happen by someone you know. Like the narrative around a public park being dangerous because there could be a stranger who's a predator lurking behind a tree is actually statistically inaccurate. You know, like you're in your home and in your bedroom, you're far more likely to be sexually assaulted and raped than you are at Royal Park. And similarly, I think people, you know, will lock their cars or clutch their purses when walking past housing estates in Carlton or Fitzroy or Kensington. And it's like these really racialized logics of like, who the predator is lurking behind the tree or lurking around the corner that are actually statistically inaccurate, you know? Like, you're more likely to be burgled by someone, again, that you know. It's like random home invasions or random burglaries and robberies are not happening by, like, you know, your local Somali housing estate residents. Like, they're minding their own fucking business. They don't give a shit about you, besides the fact that you're, like, fucking up their neighborhood. But, you know, like, these are really, like, statistical inaccuracies around risk that I feel like are predicated upon these really toxic misunderstandings around actually who is at risk and who causes harm and danger.
Yeah, I think going back to a point that I made earlier, I think that, like, again, the movements that we need to be seeing right now is a shift of consciousness, is a shift of thought. Like, it's not about all these actions that stay kind of within the same kind of paradigm of the police state and where we're at right now. Instead of putting in, you know, it's like, for safety, it's like actually having people engage with diversity. It's actually having people engage with the slipperiness of sexuality and gender. It's actually having people engage with what different identities and different things mean to their different cultures, and like having people be interested in that and having people have an awareness and a sensitivity to how different cultures define different things.
Yeah,
that's going to be more safe.
Yeah, and also that like people have the right to take risks, and the right to take risk is in the domain of the cis white male, right? We've all got the right to take risks.
Yeah, I was just thinking when I think of risk, like I think a lot of like my family and people that I love would be people that. They're the sort of people that everyone's scared to walk past at night. Like, yeah, I'm just thinking of my brothers, for example. Yeah, like they're the people that say white women clutch their handbags when they walk past. But I'm thinking when we are out, like for me, yeah, the biggest thing I'm scared of are like white men. Cis white men. So, it's when we think about safety, I think in terms of how laws are made and the way that spaces are designed, it seems to be to make white men feel safe. Anyway, it's just interesting. I think you're right. Yeah, the kind of right to take risks and the payoff that comes from that. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just thinking a lot at the moment. Sorry.
We might throw to some questions from the audience. If you just raise your hand, and we'll see if we can get a microphone across to you. If not, No takers? We could.
I'm just interested, thank you all for your comments, super mind expanding and awesome thing. There was stuff about, the state, capital S, and it's the perpetuation of that, and then Brooke, you were talking about shifting consciousness, and I'm just interested in maybe, I came here a bit late as well, but I'd love to hear more of it. And I guess more specifically, how you see the strength and perpetuity of the capital S state, and what the shift in consciousness might look like in terms of that.
Interesting.
Just repeat the question. I think the question was, what does the state look in terms of what is the shift in consciousness that needs to happen? Is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like I could talk about this for an hour, but I'll try and...
Your 7 minutes.
For 7 hours. I want to make this answer relevant to this audience and to what we've just talked about, so I'll try my best.
Have a go.
Yeah, so I guess... I mean, the way I view politics and the way I view the way we respond to it and the way in which, we've been protesting and organising. When we're born, we go through trauma, and if that's not unpacked and that's not dealt with, we are unconsciously repeating cycles of trauma and cycles of abuse. So I think, for me personally, what I think is the shift in consciousness is a commitment to the self, and a commitment to love and to community and to healing. Healing is huge. I think that is going to be the major thing that's going to change. In order to transcend all this kind of bureaucratic bullshit, capital S state, laws, all this kind of stuff, is we need to transcend it. Our own drama and our own, what we're bringing to our own lives on a personal level. And, one of the things that we're brought into is a world of binaries. And binary gender especially is really, really violent. And we all deal, cis or not, with trauma based on having to be brought into a world of this binary. So I think that's part of the reason why non-binary people are here in this century, in this decade, and becoming so prevalent, and why our voices are reaching out, is because globally we're asking for a shift in consciousness. We've been fighting all these fights around racial justice, queer justice, justice for women, reproductive rights, blah, blah, for so long. And for me, it doesn't look like more marginalised people joining politics, because it's the political system is wrong. The way in which it's all set up is all wrong. And how do we actually go above that? And I don't think it's socialism or blah, blah, blah. For me, it's actually a spiritual, it's actually engaging in the spiritual. It's actually engaging with your body. It's actually engaging with your true authenticity, why you're actually alive. You're alive to be yourself to the fullest extent that you can be, and that to be yourself, if you look into the core of yourself, who you truly are, you don't want to hurt other people because you recognize that everybody else is just a part of you. And so colonialism is just all about disconnection. That's the way I see it. It's all about, you can't hurt people, you can't rape or abuse people if you see them as part of you. And we all are one being, split off into many different manifestations of that. So when we actually take on the practice as feeling connected to the world, feeling connected to everybody around us, that I think for me is going to be the shift. That is going to make the difference. But it's we just have to, we're still in this place where until people wake up, things just need to keep things are getting worse and worse and worse, because people are wanting to stay stuck in these lower vibrations. And working out with politics, but I just don't think that's the answer.
I'm really, so you mentioned capitalist state a couple of times. I think for me, like on one hand I recognise the state exists because it materially impacts my life, but on the other hand I really don't recognise its legitimacy. I think in terms of the consciousness stuff, I think if we all started to operate as though the state is illegitimate and we, not me, you, respect Aboriginal sovereignty, I think that's like a better way of existing. So, yeah, in what ways is that possible? I think this country would be a lot better if people started to think about that a bit more. Yeah.
I mean, I just finally say that I think it is possible to have a consciousness shift and a communist revolution. You know, there's things like it can be simultaneous, and also that it's something from the other panel the other day. Like, and as far as actually putting into practice the centering of community, non-state community, non-bordered community, is actually like building rapport with people that don't have the ability to serve you in any way. And I think so much of our relationship today has this like specific valence of extraction and use value. And I think insofar as relationships have been reduced to their use value, we lose community, and we lose an ability for like community to mobilize and make structural change. And so I think actually looking at how you can implement and develop and cultivate relationships that are not of use value with people that you have nothing to gain from, or with people who are much worse off than you. And you know, it's not necessarily just like sitting down with a homeless person to like chat almost for like 5 minutes to absolve your guilt, but like actually more productive, generative conversations, like building and organizing in ways that look at skills transfer and that look at like movement making is my kind of vision for what that shift could look like.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to end on. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Thanks Melbourne Knowledge Week for having this discussion. It's been really great. I'd love to thank my guests again today. It's been a really awesome discussion. Round of applause. Thank you. Thanks everyone.